All right, so welcome again, everyone. I'm so happy to have Ann Dolan back with us again to kick off our school year. And she is here tonight to talk with us about how to improve our children's executive functioning skills without arguments this school year. But I do want to spend just a little bit of time introducing Ann to all of you if you've not actually been to a webinar or heard Ann speak before. So Ann Dolan knows how relationships between parents and children can become defined by grades. With more than 25 years combined of teaching, tutoring, and consulting experience, Ann and her tutors and coaches at Educational Connections have been helping kids to overcome academic obstacles, improve their confidence and grades, and reduce stress along the way. What once started as an hour of tutoring at her kitchen table has grown to a nationally recognized company, employing 185 educators, working with over 10,000 students. When she's not helping with parents and kids, you can find her on WTOP radio as their education expert. Ann's the author of 3 books, including her book, Getting Past Procrastination, How to Get Your Kids Organized, Focused, and Motivated Without Being the Bad Guy. Please give a warm welcome to Ann Dolan.
Mary Beth, thank you so much for that introduction. I really appreciate it. And I always love being with the parents at the Parent Resource Center. So thank you so much for having me. You know, every day parents call our office looking for help for their kids. And here's what parents are telling me. They're saying things like, oh my gosh, last year, virtual learning, it was a disaster. And I'm so worried about this year. I'm worried that my son or daughter won't be able to keep up. Sometimes parents will say, you know what, he just doesn't know what's coming due. It's like these due dates come out of nowhere. Other times parents will say, I have to stay on top of them to get anything done. And I'm worried that if I totally back off, nothing will get done. And I also hear, you know what? She's not my only one. I've got 2 other kids. This is a lot of work. Now, on the other hand, here's what kids say. Mom, I've got this. Don't worry, it's under control. Do not micromanage me, Mom. I will do it eventually. Just get off my case. I promise I'm going to turn it in. Does any of this sound familiar? Well, here's the thing. When kids struggle with these types of things and parents feel like they have to be on their kids' cases to get work done, it's often that their issue isn't motivation. It's not that they don't care about school, and it's not that they don't want to do the work. It's often rooted in something we call executive functions. Now, executive functions are actually these cognitive processes in the frontal lobe of your brain, right behind your forehead, and they're really important for school success. In fact, executive functions have to do with really 2 things: planning out the task you want to accomplish, and then actually executing on it and getting it done. And so you can see when it comes to homework, for example, if your child has something to do in math, they need to know what exactly do they have to do? What are the steps they have to go through? And then they have to focus enough to get it done. Those are all executive function skills. That's kind of a simplistic version. In reality, there's actually 8 of them. Just for purposes tonight, because we have a short time together, I'm going to focus on 3 of these skills. So let me share what they are real quick. The first one is inhibition. And this is actually just a fancy word for focus. You know, again, that math homework, can you focus enough to get that done, to get those 20 problems done, even though other things are distracting you? Maybe it's your phone. Maybe it's your little brother on the other side of the room. Initiation. Can you make yourself get started? Now, many of you have children with ADHD. And maybe they don't have ADHD, but they still have these weaknesses in executive function. Because not everybody with weak executive function skills has ADHD, but everybody that has ADHD does have weak executive function skills. But it honestly doesn't matter. At one time or another, your child will have difficulty with initiation. And when the task is hard or boring, That's when kids do not want to start it. They procrastinate. We'll talk about that. The next one, this is where the one thing I think is most important for executive functions. And this is the ability to plan out what you have and to be organized enough to get it done, to know where your materials are. Here are some other ones. We're not going to focus so much on these tonight, but just so you know what they are: self-monitoring, working memory, that's juggling all the things in your head that you have to do, shifting, putting down one thing, starting another, organizing your materials, but not as much stuff anymore. It more has to do with your electronic files, because most of kids' work is online. And then lastly, emotional control. Basically, can you get all of this done and keep it together? Can you get it done without getting upset, breaking down in tears? That's emotional control, and that is an executive function skill. All right, so here's the thing. When kids have difficulty doing those two things, focusing and finishing, there are three things we can do as parents. We can say, you know what? This is your work, not mine. I already went to fourth grade. You deal with it, and we can ignore it. We can micromanage it and do the total opposite, or we can support it. So if we ignore the issues, that means that we're saying to ourselves, you know, I heard in this webinar that executive functions just take longer to develop for some kids, and for many people, it's into their mid-20s. So maybe my child is just a little bit later to develop, and I'll just ignore it until he catches up. That is one way you could approach it. You could do the complete opposite, as I mentioned, and you can micromanage it. That's when you say, you know what? I'm really worried you're not going to get all this work done. So I'm going to go on Schoology, I always pronounce that incorrectly, with you. And I'm going to go through all your assignments, and we're going to figure out what you have to do, when it's due, and I'm going to sit with you until you get everything done. That would be an extreme degree of micromanaging. But then there's this other option. Oh, sorry, before I go to that other option, let's talk about what happens when we do one of the two first things. We either ignore or we micromanage. Our kids can get into this cycle of negativity. Let's say that, I'm going to go back to that math homework example. Your child doesn't like math. It's really arduous and tedious, and they have lots of difficulty with it. They have a hard time focusing. They go up to their room to do their math homework, and 3 hours later, they still have nothing done. What happens? Well, in that case, you usually, as a parent, get on your child's case and say, why didn't you do that? Why haven't you gotten this done? Come on, let's go. You have plenty of time to do it. So they face criticism from parents, often from teachers too, because teachers see they're unfocused in class. When that happens and they have criticism from others, it makes the child think, you know what? Maybe I'm kind of bad at this anyways. You know what? I'm not good at this. I'm just not even going to try hard anymore. This stinks. And so when that happens, kids put forth reduced effort. They're kind of like getting into avoidance mode. And when that happens, they put forth very little effort. They don't do their work. Where do their grades go? They go down. So now they have bad grades and they haven't done the work. So what happens again? Criticism from others, and the cycle repeats itself. So as parents, if we do one of those first two options, we ignore it or we micromanage it, typically a cycle of negativity continues. Now, you might think that, well, what if I kind of micromanage it and I just make sure my child gets done and I just make sure that all the answers are right, so it's good when he turns it in? Actually, there are lots of studies that show, and this is so counterintuitive, that the more you help your child with homework, the poorer the student does. You would think the more I help my child, the better he'll do in school. But the reason is kids get in that lowered confidence mode. They feel like if somebody isn't helping me all the time, I'm not going to be able to do this independently, and they lack confidence. So we don't want to take that angle. But we do want to pick option C. We want to support our kids with structure. And tonight, what we're going to do is talk about what that means. What is support, and structure? Well, first, the support part means that we're going to shift our mindset a little bit. I'll talk about this a little bit more later on, but we're going to notice the good things that our child does, and we're going to take the emphasis off what our child doesn't do well. Then we're going to have structures in place in our home because we know that our kids are not internally structured. They don't have that rhythm to say to themselves, well, I better start my work now because I have to go to soccer practice in an hour. That doesn't occur to them. So for us, we're going to have to put these structures in place to make sure our kids can basically get with the flow and they're able to follow through on what they have to do. So let's talk about those structures. We're going to talk about 6 strategies that can help. 3 are structures, and then 3 are actually strategies for finishing and focusing. These are the ones that have to do with initiation, getting started, and inhibition, batting away distractions so you can get your work done. All right, so here's the thing. We're going to start with a Sunday session. There is a reason Sunday is the first day of the week for kids academically, because it's the day that is actually, in my opinion, the most important. And here's how you can make this work for your child. It's called a Sunday session. In a Sunday session, you're going to do a few things. You're going to take time each week. It's a reoccurring appointment that you put in your phone, and it might be after something that already happens. That's the best way to create a habit, is piggyback it on to something you already do. So let's say you have Sunday dinner. You put in your phone Sunday session, 7 to 7:20. If your kids have phones, they can also have this appointment. Make sure you set in a little alert for yourself. And you're going to say to your kids, okay, let's preview the week ahead. And everybody is in on the action, not just your kid with ADHD, but you, if you have a significant other in the house, and your other kids. So everybody's in on it. You're going to say, let's talk about the week ahead. This is a time when kids, depending on their age, are going to look at their assignments and their extracurriculars. All right, so here's how it looks for young kids. And these would be kids in elementary school. You might have a calendar on the fridge. You do not have to have a fancy monthly calendar. I find that's really hard to maintain. But instead, you can get a weekly planner. And on the weekly planner, you can do this with your kids, so you don't have to do it on your own. As part of your Sunday session, you say, okay, Jimmy, you have soccer on Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Kala, you have dance on Thursday at 4. You're going to basically go through the whole schedule and you're going to write it on the planner, and everybody's going to be talking about it. This is a skill called previewing. And for young children, they like to know what to expect. It really decreases anxiety, especially saying things like, I don't want to go to that. You didn't tell me about that. Previewing is really helpful for young kids. You're going to do this together. And then if they have homework, if they're old enough, you might say, let's look at your assignment notebook. What do you have coming up this week? Do you have any big tests, projects, that type of thing? This would be the time to take your child to Michael's, instead of when they remember about it, that book report due the next day that they have to make a diorama on Wednesday at 8 o'clock. So you're basically just planning ahead with your child. Now, older kids are going to be different. You may have a planner like this, especially if you have multiple kids, or it could be that you say to your kids, let's look at the week ahead. What do you have coming up in terms of academics? So for your kids, it might be that they pull up their calendar online and they look at their class schedule. They look at what's due and they figure out, oh, I have a geometry test on Wednesday. I have an English paper due on Thursday. This is their type of previewing. You can also model how you preview the week. It could be something as simple as on Sunday evening, I make my lunch for work on Sunday night. You can talk about that. I lay out my clothes for for Monday, for my work day. For me, I look at my appointments for the week with parents and I confirm all my appointments. I go through my calendar to see what I have coming up. It mentally prepares me on Sunday for Monday. And if we do this with our kids and they see, oh, this is something that everybody does, it's helpful, and we have it as this reoccurring appointment, it can establish a habit for them that hopefully they can do independently later on. All right, so we talked about the Sunday session and previewing for the week. Let's talk about what's going to happen daily. I've often found that on a daily basis, if kids have ADHD and parents also struggle with attention and focus and organization, every day is different, and that makes life harder. So as a parent, if you can say, you know what, this year, let's talk about a set time for beginning homework. To be honest, the end time isn't as concerning to me, like when kids finish homework. But what's more important is when they're going to start it. Now, the thing is, in reality, you can't have set times. People are just too busy. So unless you have a household where nothing else is going on, you might be able to say, every day we start homework at 4 o'clock. But chances are it's going to be too difficult to do that. You just want to pick a general time frame for kids to start their work. Even if they just have a tiny bit to do, this routine is helpful. So here's all the times that I think of as a parent: right after school, after about a 30-minute break, or whenever they get home from aftercare, they still get the 30-minute break, and then they can start their work. And I find that a 30-minute break is really good for elementary kids. Before dinner, after dinner, before bed, before school the next day. A couple kids reminded me that I forgot the most important times, and I asked, when is that? And they said, on the bus to school, and then another one said, in the study hall right before my class. So there's lots of times. But in general, we want our kids to start homework before dinner. Even if they just get out all their things and they figure out what they have to do, that's a huge step. And that really can help with kids staying up too late, or going up in their room and you don't really know what they're doing. If you say, I want everybody to start before dinner, and you have that agreement, you've already discussed it, it makes life a whole lot easier. All right, so next we want to determine a place. And a place is a designated place for kids to do their work every day. For younger kids, they should be in earshot of you. If you have a 2-story house and you're working on the first floor, allow them to do the same. They don't need to be sitting next to you, but maybe you're in the kitchen and they're in the dining room and they have their little place at the table. That's great. You don't need to, again, be next to them, but you want to be able to look over from time to time, make sure they're doing okay. In general, for young kids, they should not be doing homework in their room because the room is inherently distracting. As kids get older, it may not be so bad, but as long as they can do homework kind of near you, that's just a little bit better. It's more like in a public place, even if it's in your home. And in this space, if you can have a couple things, this will really help your child. The first thing is a whiteboard, and a whiteboard can be, one of these in the display where it's kind of big, hanging on a wall. It doesn't matter. It could be just a small little tablet your child has if there's space. But the idea is when your child wants to write reminders to him or herself, they can just put it on the whiteboard and it's there in front of them. And for many kids, that generally works better than reminders in a notebook. They see it there. I also have lots of kids that we work with that are huge fans of Post-it notes. And they use Post-it notes for themselves as reminders. So even just having a stack in your child's area can be helpful. All right, so we've talked about setting up the week by previewing for the Sunday session. We've also talked about when work can start, and we've talked about the place. So let's discuss now the strategies for focusing and finishing. When it comes to just getting started and we see our kids procrastinating, our automatic assumption is they know how to do it, but they don't want to. And sometimes this is true, but it honestly isn't the real reason most kids procrastinate. When kids struggle with executive functions or ADHD, often they won't start on something because they were overwhelmed and they're underprepared. Because to them, kids with ADHD don't have a great memory of something they did well before. They often remember that it felt bad and that it didn't go well, even if it maybe did. So they associate that assignment with something that's big and difficult, and they feel overwhelmed much faster than kids without ADHD. It's kind of like their method of operation. And when they feel overwhelmed, what do? They avoid. So we see this all the time in kids. They feel overwhelmed and they feel underprepared. They can't do it. But then there's this whole other class of kids that we often neglect. And these are our anxious kids. And our anxious kids often have the same behavior, but they do it because they're perfectionists. And they say to themselves, I'm not going to start that English essay because I don't think I'm going to do a good enough job on it. And I'm worried that the end product won't be perfect. I just can't make myself do this right now. I'm just not going to do it. And they avoid it and they avoid it. And they think that by avoiding it, they'll feel better. But the opposite happens, especially to anxious kids. They feel worse. And then they start to beat themselves up over it and they avoid even more. And then before they know it, they haven't gotten started till very late at night and they're up until way too late in the morning. I talked to a mom the other day that said, I saw this pattern with my daughter in the past. I was hoping this year would be different, but she's already been up 2 nights until 2 o'clock in the morning. And I need help. I need to figure out how we can help her to manage her time better. It makes sense. She's worried about it being perfect. So what are some strategies? This brings me to number 4. What are some strategies to get started and keep going? Let me share with you one other thing your child should have in their study area, and it's a timer. Now, certainly, it can be the timer on your phone, or it can be a physical timer. I personally like a physical timer. We teach kids, when we work with kids, we teach them how to use timers because ultimately, even though we've worked with them on, which I'll talk about in a second, how we help them map things out, when they're on their own, they're going to feel that surge of procrastination. And the first step of getting over that is to realize that it's happening. Like, oh my gosh, I'm about to procrastinate. Oh my gosh, I need a strategy. And here comes the timer. So we'll teach them. Set it just for 5 minutes. We call this 5 minutes of fury. And you say to yourself, I'm going to work as furiously as I can, as hard as I can, as much as I can in just 5 minutes. Then I can take a break and get started again. Usually they can keep going. They can call it the tolerable 10. They set it for 10 minutes. Anybody can tolerate anything for just 10 minutes. Or they can take their age and add 1 to it. It doesn't really matter. But a timer can help you just get over that of getting going in the first place. Now, for older kids, especially for high school and somewhat for middle school, definitely for college, we also teach them to use the timer in a different way. And this is called the Pomodoro Technique. And the Pomodoro Technique was actually developed in the 80s from research by an Italian scientist who looked at the way in which, the time frame in which people can pay the best attention. Is a person's span for focus, is it 10 minutes? Is it an hour and a half? Is it 90 minutes? Or is it an hour, 60 minutes? How long can somebody sustain effort and attention without losing motivation? So he did all these studies. And when he did these studies, he used this timer because in Italian, Pomodoro means tomato. And that's how it got its name. And there's even a whole book on his research and everything that went into it. I personally have found a ton of success using this with kids. And our coaches, when we work with students, this is one of the strategies that will help them to set up. So basically, they set the timer for 25 minutes because that's what he found is that sweet spot. So you set the timer for 25 minutes. And you say to yourself, just like you did for 5 minutes, I'm going to work as hard as I can, as best as I can, focus as much as I can for 25 minutes. Because the truth is, older kids, they need a longer swath of time to do their work. Now, here's what we know about the Pomodoro technique. Your brain can't handle so many. So after you set the timer for 25 minutes, you got to give yourself a 5-minute break. You can do another Pomodoro. So here's how it would look. Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro, break, Pomodoro. And 4 Pomodoros is all people can handle. But for kids, it might just be they do 1 Pomodoro. Or if they're lucky on a night, they might be able to do 2 Pomodoros. This is a strategy not just for kids, but for adults. So if you find that you have a hard time getting stuff done, especially things that are boring or difficult, consider the Pomodoro technique. All right, so let me share with you some other ideas. And these are actually tools for focus. And then we're going to talk about my favorite thing to discuss, which is communicating. So let's talk about some apps that we can use to help us and our kids focus and finish. And so I'm going to share these with you because they work for kids, but you never know, they might work for you too. So these are all called they're in the category of website blockers. And often kids, I don't know if you found this with your own kids, but in kids that I've worked with and our tutors and coaches work with, they're super quick to identify what throws them off task. You know, they'll say, I was on YouTube for 3 hours. I can't stop watching TikTok videos. So they know what distracts them. So stay focused and self-control allow kids to blacklist the sites they deem to be distracting. So they just type in TikTok or it could be Yahoo Sports, whatever it is, into Stay Focused, which is actually a Chrome extension, and Self-Control is just for Macs. They do the same thing. And they say, I don't want to go to these websites for a specific amount of time. Maybe it's 20 minutes because they really want to study for a test that's coming up. And no matter what they do, they can disable the app, restart their computer, and they can't get to that website that they wanted to block. Now, there's a newer one out on the market, and these are all paid. I think this one's like $5, and it's called Focus Booster. And it's actually based on the Pomodoro technique of 25 minutes. So for older kids, we tend to encourage them to use Focus Booster because they tend to do well with Pomodoro. And here's one that's actually not for laptops, but it is for phones, and it's called Forest. Forest is the #1 app for kids. It's the one that always trends the highest, and for good reason. I have it myself on my phone. In fact, a middle schooler, this was years ago, told me about it in the first place. And she's like, you got to check this out. My friends and I all use it. And since then, we've recommended it and used it with lots of kids. So same concept, except you're not blocking anything. You're saying to yourself, oh, I really want to study for this history test. I'm going to go into Forest. You click on Forest, and I'm going to move this toggle bar around my tree for a certain amount of time, say 20 minutes. And during that time, a tree will grow on the home screen of your phone. That's why it's called Forest, because a tree is growing in your forest. And during that time, if you get distracted by going to TikTok or Instagram or Snapchat, the app will give you a warning. Get back to studying or get back to whatever you're doing. And if you don't, if you continue watching videos on TikTok, the tree will wither and die. Nobody wants a dead tree. You want the tree to grow to fruition, to plant it in your forest. And actually, the company that makes Forest, once there's a collection of trees, will plant a tree in the student's honor. So it's really motivating to kids. Kids really like Forest. All right, so let's switch gears, and I want to talk about my last strategy because I don't want to leave these kids out. These are the anxious kids I mentioned, and they may not always look like they're anxious. Have you ever seen a duck swimming in a pond? You know, when the duck is gliding through the water, they look like they don't have a care in the world. They look like everything's okay, but below the water surface, their feet are paddling like this. They're in a frenzy. And I see some of our kids like that. They look like, I got this, I can handle this. But then all of a sudden you see their grades slipping. It seems like they don't care, but actually they do care. It seems like a strange phenomenon. Often they're really just anxious, and sometimes they have these perfectionistic tendencies. And so when they start to avoid things and work piles up, they avoid it even more. So when we get kids like this, we do must do, should do, could do with them. So we'll say, we did a ton last year in the pandemic because kids had so much work they hadn't done. So we would take their whole list of work, and first we'd figure out with the teachers what can be forgiven, what is absolutely not essential, or what doesn't count for much of the grade. We're getting rid of that. But we would take what's remaining and we'd say, all right, what on this list is a must do, meaning you have to get this done today because it's due tomorrow. What's a should do? And a should do is, yeah, you should do it today, but if you don't, it's okay because it's not due until next week. So that's categorized, that's coded as a should do. And then a could do are all the nice to haves. Like maybe it's an assignment that's just extra credit and you really don't need it. Or maybe the teacher said, oh, wouldn't it be nice if you read this article? You really don't have to do that. That can come off your list. You could do it, but you don't have to. So now the list of work that you have is just must-dos. And this is something you can do with your child if they're feeling overwhelmed. Even if they just have 3 things to do and it's one night, you can say, what's your must-do for the night? And that can kind of dial back their anxiety as well. So what are your next steps? I've given you a lot to think about. And what I would encourage you to do is to not do all these things with your child because it's honestly too much. You might want to pick one thing that you think you might be able to implement with your student. Just one to start. Because the truth is, some kids will think it's a fairly good idea and they're willing to try it. But some kids, because they've already had a bad experience with school, or perhaps because your relationship maybe has been fractured on the altar of academics, they're not going to be open to overtures. And that's just how it is working with kids. Sometimes kids will listen better to somebody else and not mom or dad. And that's just kind of true of most families. I even found this with my own kids. There are certain things I could do with them and that they were willing to work with me. And then other things, not so much. So if that's the case in your family, don't feel like you have to go it alone. We work with kids all the time. And when we teach these executive function skills, we actually do it in 2 different ways. One is by doing what we call executive function coaching. And this is when, and so again, this is a technique that your child will let you do this with them. This is how we approach it. When we get a child who's really disorganized, they're not sure which side is up, what they have due, they don't really have any systems for organization, we'll open up their portal with them and we'll ask lots of questions. Tell me about math. Show me how your teacher reports out your assignments. Where does she keep your documents? How do you turn things in? How do you tell what is due? Okay, let's go to biology. How do you know what's due? Let's look at your list of assignments. So we'll figure out all the things the student has to do, even if they're due in 2 weeks. And we'll help the student break down those large tasks, the ones they tend to avoid that are due later on, not my problem now. And we'll help them break them up into smaller chunks. Then we'll help them prioritize their list for today. And when we break things up in chunks with kids, we don't just give them a list. I found kids, especially disorganized ones, aren't as good with lists as they are with calendaring. And calendaring is a technique when kids put their to-dos into their calendar. They have a time for it each day. So that's generally what an executive function coach does, along with other things like helps kids to study for upcoming tests, might help them tackle the things that are hard for them, which is typically something like writing. But then there's tutoring with executive function. And that's when maybe your child needs a tutor I'll go back to the math example at the beginning, but they also need a little bit of coaching. So we'll help the student break down all their large math assignments, put together their study plan, teach them how to study independently as well. And so that integrates a subject, tutoring, with an executive function skill. So there is help out there. But let's say you want to be the teacher and you want to work with your child. How do you make that happen in your home? Well, you always want to start with a conversation. You don't want to leave this webinar, go to your child after this and say, hey, Johnny, I was on this webinar with this homework lady, and this is what we're going to do. It won't go over well. Instead, you might want to say, can we talk tonight after dinner? You might want to say this tomorrow. How's 7:30? And this way, you're setting up kind of like an appointment with your child. You're treating them like an adult, and you're going to problem solve together. And then you're going to talk about what you've noticed. Personally, I love the words I've noticed. I don't know how I came upon these words. Actually, I think I did when I was a teacher. I was a special ed teacher in Fairfax County. And I saw that, some parents would approach me in a really collaborative way. And other parents came in with, they were really upset with something. And I felt really, it wasn't collaborative. I felt like it was kind of me against them, and it wasn't a great feeling. And I saw that some parents would tell me about the behaviors that they saw at home, and that was really helpful for me. And so I started using their words, which are I noticed with kids, and they started to work great. They're like magic words. So often I'll just notice a behavior in kids, and I'll say, oh, I've noticed it's hard to keep this Google Calendar. So that to me sounds better, and to the child it sounds better than saying, you can't keep track of anything. The school calendar isn't working for you. Or I might say, I've noticed that equations are really hard. And that's better than you need to do better at math. You really can't solve these equations. That doesn't go over that well with kids. So you can start out by saying, I've noticed this has been difficult this year. And just really stop there and let your child tell you about it. And basically you're going to say those words, tell me about what's going on. And as parents, anytime we want to have a conversation with our kids, it's not our job to problem solve. We don't need to give advice. Our number one job is to really be a great listener and to nod and empathize so that they continue to talk to us. We want to stay calm. We want to be collaborative. So if our kids have trouble again in the future, they know that they can come to us and we're going to be understanding and we're not going to pass judgment. But on an ongoing basis, after this first conversation, you may want to start asking powerful questions instead of barking orders, which would be micromanaging. This would be more of the supportive part, the middle ground. So instead of, do you have any homework? Which isn't so bad actually. An easier thing to help your child get started would, especially for your young child, do you want to start math or spelling? Or to an older child, you could say, what's the one thing you really want to get accomplished today? I like these questions because for those anxious kids that tend to procrastinate, it boils it down to, okay, what's important? And for the kids that are going to procrastinate because they're overwhelmed, for those kids too, it helps boil it down. All right, what is the one thing I want to do? Or what's my first step? Here are some other powerful questions. Instead of, did you study for your science test? It might be, what's the first thing you might do to get ready for that science test? Instead of, you better start that history project, young lady. It might be, what's something small you can do to get started on your history project? For a younger student, are you ready for that spelling test? Hey, after dinner, would it help if I read the words to you and you wrote them down? I also love something called the success rating scale. And the success rating scale is from a book called Nowhere to Hide. And I love the book. It's really a fabulous book by Jerome Schultz. And he actually came up, I used a 1 to 10 rating scale for years with kids, But he came up with this one, which I actually like a little bit better. It's based on 5. So here's what you do. You say to your kids when they're really stressed out or they really don't want to do an assignment, they're procrastinating, or you find out that it's overdue when you go on the homework portal together, you could say, on a scale of 1 to 5, how difficult do you rate this assignment? The next question is, and you listen to what they say. So do not pass any judgment. You listen to what they say. Oh, okay, you said a 4. Well, let me ask you another question. On a scale of 1 to 5, what's your motivation to do this? And remember, a 1 is, oh, I'm super motivated. I could totally do this easily on my own. And 5 means I am so unmotivated. You'd have to pull my teeth before I would do it. Like, that's how much I do not want to do this work. And I just am not going to do it. So ideally, we don't want kids to be 5s. 5s are bad news. But it's okay if they're a 3 and a 3. They're kind of that middle ground. Because if they're always a 1, it's going to mean that the work is not challenging enough. And they're probably kind of bored with it. They might be motivated to do it, but that's because it's just so darn easy. So really, if we see kids around a 3, that's just fine. That's kind of like the sweet spot for kids. Yeah, this assignment on difficulty, it's a 3. It's going to be challenging, but you know what? I have my notes. Or, oh, I remember my teacher did a PowerPoint on this. I can look back. You know what? It's kind of in the middle for me when it comes to motivation. Do I want to do it? Not really, but will I? Yeah. So we're looking for that 3 and 3 as kind of that sweet spot. But if you ask your child these questions and you're consistently hearing that it's a 4 or a 5, that means your child's brain is in flight or fight mode. That means that the frontal lobe, which is the problem solving mode, again, that's your ability to plan and to execute on tasks, has gone offline. And the more primitive part of the brain in the back, the amygdala, is responsible for something we call fight or flight. Oh my gosh, this is so hard. I'm going to run away or I'm going to fight, and this is where we see a lot of avoidance in our kids, because if they're a 4 or 5, they're going to start to avoid. So when you ask these questions, or maybe you just ask one question and you hear a 4 or 5, it's not your job to say, oh, we got to solve this. I'm going to make this right for you. Let's get out that assignment. We're going to do it together. No. Our first job is to listen. A 4. Okay. Tell me about that. You know what? You're right. I can see why that would be hard. You don't have to agree with your child, but you want to be a good listener. Now, sometimes your child will say, oh, you know what, Mom, this is a 5. It is so hard. And you're thinking, okay, this is like a 2. You did this 2 weeks ago and you finished it. You didn't love it, but you did it. It's really a 2 or a 3. It doesn't matter. If your child perceives it as a 5, it's a 5. And you can bet that they're going to have a hard time with it. So that's when you want to stop. Do not give advice and just listen. Tell me about that and let them talk to you about it. Then after they're done telling you why they think it's 5, you say, I get it. I can totally understand that. So, I understand it's a 5. What might be your first step? I know you don't want to do it, and if you had a magic wand and we could make it go away and make it get done, what would be that first step? Like, what would you do first if you had a magic wand? So basically you're asking them to boil it down. What would you do? So I put together all these things for you in a document. And I put together powerful questions. I put together the success metric, and I'm going to share with you how to reframe those why questions in just a second. And if you text this number, and you can pick up your phone and do it right now, if you text 55444 and you type in the word communication, oh shoot, and I just realized, I think this is a lowercase c, not a capital, which is what it says. Type in the word communication with a lowercase c, and it will come to you in your inbox. If you have a phone that's not from, it doesn't work for any international numbers, email me. I'm going to give you my email at the end and I'll send it directly to you. But this is a really quick way to get it, 55444. and the word communication, lowercase. All right, so here's the why questions I was mentioning before. And by the way, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're going to go to questions in just a minute. So when we say something to kids like, why didn't you do this? Why are you so disorganized? Why haven't you started this yet? It's really hard for kids to answer those questions because they require a lot of critical thinking. So your child has to think, okay, why didn't I start this yet? Well, actually, I was doing my English and I forgot about the math. And then when I remembered, I wasn't sure how to do it. So I just put it aside. And then I texted Susan for help, but she didn't write back to me. So I just there's so much that goes on in a kid's head. So the why questions aren't great. They often result in lots of disengagement and conflict. So instead of looking back, okay, we can look back all day with the things our kids didn't do right, but it doesn't do service to anybody. Instead, we want to look ahead. So instead of, why didn't you turn that science lab in? You say, do you have anything coming up in science? Again, looking forward. Instead of, I don't understand how you can have missing assignments already. School just started. What do you mean? You might say, using those words I've noticed there are some missing assignments. What's your first step in tackling them? Or what's the one assignment you want to get started on? That would be a better question. I put together all of these examples in the packet that if you text, it will come your way. So again, 55444, lowercase communication. All right, so I will also share with you, these things are easier said than done, because if we could all go to a webinar and get information, life would be easy because we'd all get along with our kids perfectly. But the reality is, it is hard to do this. It takes practice over time. It's also the reality that we cannot change our kids' behavior. We can only change ours. And by changing our behavior, it often results in kids complying more and actually doing what we want them to do. Along the way, you can expect glitches. It is how it's going to be this school year. Our kids have been out of practice for a year and a half. Many of them haven't been inside of a school for that long, and this is their first go at it again. We haven't had practice as parents having our kids go to school every day, and they haven't had practice doing it. So you can expect that there will be some glitches. So here's what I would recommend, going back to the good things, noticing good things. Here's what I want you to do. If you take away nothing else today, is to do this. For the next 30 days, focus on one good thing your child does each day. Now, you can do it related to anything, or you could focus it on academics. So you could say, I really love how you started your homework before dinner. I can tell you're really focusing on math. I like the way you wrote out those steps. I noticed you had all your materials ready the night before. It sure makes mornings a lot easier. So you're noticing effort. You're noticing things that kids do. What you don't want to say is, that's great, you got an A on that test. I told you you're just as smart as your sister. We don't want to talk about any of the things that have to do with grades. Honestly, the main thing is to notice effort. That's where it's all about, because effort can easily be controlled by kids. So for the next 30 days, one thing a day, each day, that we notice that kids are doing well. Because at the end of the day, it's really all about preserving relationships with our kids. You know, in 10 years, our children will not remember what they got in science or what their algebra grade was for the first quarter, but they will remember what life was like for them when they went back to school after 18 months of being home and how it felt. They will remember the feeling of the relationship they had with us as parents. Was it positive? Was it negative? Was it ripe with frustration and yelling? Or was there some patience and grace? And for that reason, we want to focus on patience and grace. We want to focus on preserving our relationship with our kids. All right, so everybody, I want to go to question and answer. Again, thank you for being with me today. My name is Ann Dolan, and you can contact me in lots of different ways. Email is best for me, Ann at EC Tutoring. I have a ton of resources on my website, which is ectutoring.com, and there's a section called blog, and I've written tons of articles about different issues that kids face. You can call me anytime, 703-934-8282. And again, if you want the ebook of communication strategies, 55444, text and the word communication. So Mary Beth, I will turn it over to you.
All right. Hi, I'm Erica. I'm one of the Parent Resource Center liaisons, and we have just a few questions we're already tracking in the chat that were given as you went along. So the first one is, any tips on how to address resistance to previewing? So this particular comment came from someone who has a 14-year-old and isn't really into that whole plan of looking ahead and making a plan for the week or the days, but I'm sure others experience this as well.
I had a student like this. I hear you. And I personally think previewing is super helpful, but this student did not think preview is helpful. And she said to me, I said, tell me why, tell me how you're feeling about this. And I said, I've noticed that you're a little bit resistant. She's like, you know what? I feel like it ruins my weekend when I look ahead on Sunday night, because then I get nervous about what I have to do this week. And I said to her, how does it also feel, upsetting when you go to school on Monday and you feel not prepared? And she said, yeah, I don't like that either. But she said, I'd rather have that than the stress the night before. And so I said, you know what, then maybe the strategy isn't working for you. Maybe this isn't the best strategy for you. What would be another way? You would know before you walked into school on Monday what's going on. And she said, I think on Friday I could just take a look and see, do I have anything I have to do this weekend? And that's all I'm going to do. And that's what she did. And it turned out great. So again, not every strategy is for every kid. For example, with timers, a lot of parents with anxious kids will say, that makes my child really anxious. And the answer is, then don't use the timer. Instead, you can monitor by task, which means I'm going to do 10 math problems and then take a break and then do 10 more. So you're kind of doing the same thing, it's just in a different way.
And I think that leads into another question of, how many times should you try something before saying this is just not for us?
It probably depends what it is. Sometimes if you've already had a relationship with your child where you've tried to push strategies on them in the past, kids are not going to be having it. And it might be that no matter what you say, they won't engage in it because there's been this fractured relationship in the past. And when that occurs, honestly, I would take a step back and take the other approach, which I mentioned, which is really focusing on the good things. It's kind of like, I was on a workshop, this was a couple of weeks ago, this woman said to me, I've had this to-do list for my husband for like a month and it's driving me crazy. And I'm just so mad at him. I tell him every day, did you do the stuff on the list? Did you do the stuff on the list? And she's like, I don't know what's wrong with him. He just won't do everything. And she said, you know what? I'm going to take a different approach. I think I'm just going to notice when he does things around the house. And I'm just going to start that way. And that's what I would recommend. I would take a totally different route and start to notice the good things and see if the relationship is healed a little bit like that. And then maybe later on, you could say, it could be something simple. It could be like, let's make lunch together the night before so we don't have to do it in the morning. Or, okay, on Sunday night, lay out your outfits or whatever it might be. It might not have to be academic, but it just might be that I'm going to get ready the night before. I'm going to preview in some other way.
Thank you. We had a comment come in on the chat saying that their son has a new diagnosis of ADHD. So he says, well, I have ADHD, so I can't do my homework. Do you have any good words to help him not use ADHD as an excuse?
Yes, I often say to kids that ADHD is actually not a lot of kids think, well, I can't pay attention. I have ADHD. I just can't. And I'll often share with them, actually, ADHD has nothing to do with attention, believe it or not, because I know you can pay attention. I saw you playing Xbox for 3 hours last week. Or, you can be on TikTok for 2 hours. It actually has to do with your ability to regulate your attention. And so that's really the key, is saying to kids, it's not about attention, it's about regulating it. It's about, when you don't want to do something, can you come up with strategies? And the answer is everybody can come up with strategies. So you can pay attention, and we just need to figure out what are some ways to make it easier for you.
Perfect. Another question, two that are related actually, is at what age should we start using Pomodoro? And somebody mentioned that they have a Pomodoro timer.
Oh, cool. Very nice. I love it. I think my mother had a Pomodoro timer in the 70s in her kitchen. I would say Pomodoro would not be for really little kids, definitely for kids that are older elementary, maybe like 5th and 6th grade, and then definitely middle and high school when they can keep their motivation and their focus for a little bit longer.
And then unless we have any new questions in the chat, the last question is, can they use some of those apps that you mentioned earlier on FCPS laptops?
Oh, people have asked me those questions before. And I think it probably depends on the app, because in another workshop, a couple of parents said, this one works, but this one doesn't. So it might be a little bit of trial and error. Oh, it looks like oh no, that's for feedback. Yes.
We did get another question.
Sure.
Someone says, I struggle with executive functioning myself, and I'm probably undiagnosed with ADHD, but being self-aware, how can I model overcoming resistance to doing the boring or challenging when I've probably been setting a less than ideal picture of myself for years?
It's okay. We all beat ourselves up about these things. And it really, instead of looking back, as I mentioned, it's over, let's look forward. So if you have a strategy that's worked for you, I would verbalize it out loud. For example, maybe a strategy is, this is what I use, I don't know if anybody else does this, but for things that I really don't want to do, like the dishes, or I'm okay loading the dishwasher, I hate to unload the dishwasher. So I'll set a timer and I'll put the timer in. I'm going to work to unload the dishwasher for 8 minutes, and then I'm going to wipe down the counters. So if you have a strategy like that, or any strategy you have that has worked for you, I would say it out loud instead of doing it privately and secretly, which is what we kind of naturally do, and say, oh, I really don't want to do this. Okay, here's a strategy I'm going to use right now. Set the timer, whatever your strategy is, so that your kids can see, I don't like doing this, but I have a way of overcoming this.
Another question is, how can we handle kids who just refuse to talk about school due to anxiety?
Anxiety is really curable, and it can be dealt with through therapy. So if you have a child who's completely tuned you out, and it's not just you, it's in other parts of their lives, I would definitely talk to the school counselor. I would, and I shouldn't say curable, that wasn't the right word, but I meant can be treated. Anxiety was one of a mental health disorder that is highly treatable. So I would talk to your counselor. I'd also talk to your pediatrician, and I might look into therapy, because certain therapists specialize in anxiety disorders, and they are through the roof right now. And so seeing somebody who can treat the condition, especially if it's not just around school but other areas, is recommended, because it may not get any better unless there's professional help.
Another question is, how do we deal with screen time if the kid wants to play all of the time? And someone else chimed in that that's a big concern of theirs as well. with more of the work being done on laptops?
It's a huge concern. You know, I wish I had a perfect answer. What you can do is designate some times of the day, parts of the day, as no screens. Now, it doesn't solve, you know, you're watching YouTube videos when you're really supposed to be uploading this file to Google Docs. It doesn't solve that problem. But you can have times like no screens at dinner, maybe no screens in the car. So certain times you can regulate it more than others. But it is hard if your child is doing all their work online and they're also watching YouTube videos. It is hard to monitor that. So for that reason, if you're seeing that in your child, I would have them do their work in a public place. So you're kind of in earshot, and it's okay to look over and peer over every now and then. Hey, you on task? It doesn't mean that you're, you know, micromanaging every step of the way, but some kids just need a little bit more oversight than others. And, you know, it is hard, especially given our situation.
And I just want to do a shout out that you can see in the chat that we do have a webinar coming up on October 1st on screen addiction. And we do have a lot of resources in our library, both on the executive functioning that we've been talking about tonight, as well as all things screen related.
That sounds like a good one, Erica.
So yes, we're so thankful to have so many incredible presenters. Are
Great.
there any other questions? It looks like that might be it in the chat, but lots of thanks and gratitude from everyone for your time.
Thank you so much, Erica. And I have a question for everybody, and I'm wondering if the people that are still here would consider participating in this. I'm wondering, what was your biggest takeaway? What did you find most helpful from this presentation? What did you learn tonight? If you could throw that in the chat of one thing that you learned, I would really appreciate it. And then as we close out, I'm going to read them. So I've always found that it's helpful to learn from others and what they learned. Focus on one good thing each day. 5 minutes of fury, setting up a preview session for the week, picking a time frame in which to start homework, how to focus on the positive. I appreciate the reminder to focus on the good, and criticism doesn't help anybody. Language is important, and micromanaging doesn't work. Learning what to say instead. The relationship with your child, I've noticed, in focusing on the positive, easy, practical tips, and remaining calm throughout. The conversation starters are going to be my newest tool. I set time for homework, asking questions about what's the first thing you might start with, the use of timers. Awesome. I'm so glad it was helpful to everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you tonight. I wish you all the best in the school year. And if I can help, let me know. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.